What if one day God appeared right before you and said, "Sacrifice the very child you loved the most for me"? What would you do? Would you deny that voice and assume you had gone insane? Would you argue, weep, and beg? Or would you remain silent and obey, believing that it was a command from the Almighty? Pause for a few seconds and ask yourself, this is not a riddle. This is not some imaginary challenge inside a video game. It is a real command. A command that could turn your entire life upside down. We often think that the love parents have for their children is the most powerful and sacred feeling any human being can experience. A father would give his own life to protect his child. A mother would rush into the fire to save her child. But what if a supreme power, the very one you have trusted your whole life, asked you to go against that instinct? What then? This is not a Hollywood script. This is not a horror story designed to scare you. This is part of the Bible, the book that billions consider to be the Word of God. And the central figure in this story is Abraham, the man whom many religions honor as the father of faith. Abraham was not just an ordinary man. He was the one who left his homeland to follow the call of God. The one who received the promise that he would become the ancestor of a great nation. And after many long years of waiting, he finally had a child, Isaac, the child of the miracle, the child he loved above all else. Yet one day, God commanded, "Take Isaac up the mountain and offer him as a burnt sacrifice to me," a command that struck like lightning on a clear day. A command beyond all logic, beyond all morality, and beyond human endurance. So why would a merciful God, always described as love and compassion, make such a cruel demand? Was this a test? Or did it conceal a deeper secret? For thousands of years, this story has stirred endless debate. Some see it as proof of absolute faith. Some believe it exposes a disturbing contradiction in the image of God, and others interpret it as a metaphor, a timeless lesson about choice, sacrifice, and trust. But before diving into those debates, let us try to place ourselves in Abraham's position. You wake up on an ordinary morning. Your son is running around the yard, his laughter echoing everywhere. And then, in that very moment, you hear God's voice. "Take him away. Offer him to me." What would you feel? Confusion, fear, anger, or a suffocating silence? Perhaps nothing could ever prepare a person for a moment like that. And that is exactly why the story of Abraham and Isaac still leaves the world in stunned silence whenever it is told. Today, we will walk together on that journey. The journey of a father who had to move forward in silence. The journey of faith faith tested to its absolute limit. A journey that begins with one haunting question. If God asked you to sacrifice your very own child, what would you do? Background and the promise. Abraham. That name echoes through the Bible as a symbol of faith. But when we turn back time to look at his beginnings, we do not see a great hero. We do not see a mighty leader. We only see an old man. A man who had already lived through almost his entire life. A husband who had carried the pain of infertility for decades. A father who, in truth, had never yet been a father. And it was at the very moment when all hope seemed gone that God came to him. God promised, "You will have a child. From your descendants, nations will be born. They will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore." Just imagine, you are old. You have stopped hoping. Your wife, Sarah, has long passed the age of childbearing. The entire village, your whole family, knows this, and surely more than a few have mocked and laughed. And then, in that moment of despair, a promise from God appears. Could you believe it? Abraham believed. He believed when everything around him said it was impossible. And then the impossible became real. Isaac was born, a small baby, his cry echoing inside that old tent. Sarah, the woman who once laughed in disbelief when she first heard God's promise, now held the child in her arms and named him Isaac, which means laughter. That laughter was not only Sarah's. It was the laughter of a family who had once despaired. It was the laughter of faith proven true. It was the laughter echoing through history, declaring that God keeps his promises. For Abraham, Isaac was not just a child. Isaac was the mark of a miracle. Isaac was living proof that every sacrifice, every step of faith was not in vain. Isaac was the heart, the soul, the future. Now place yourself in that position. You have waited your entire life. You prayed, you hoped, you despaired, and then you hoped again. And finally, you hold in your arms the child, the miracle from heaven. How deeply would you love him? How fiercely would you protect him? And then the unimaginable happened. God commanded once more, "Take Isaac, your only son, the one you love, to Mount Moriah. Offer him as a burnt sacrifice to me." Stop for just a moment. Read those words carefully. This was not a gentle test. It was not a request for a lamb or a bull or part of the harvest. This was a demand for the only son. The son Abraham loved more than his own life. A painful paradox. A request beyond all logic. The child God had given. Now God asked for him back. The promise fulfilled, now seemingly erased with a single, devastating command. What was Abraham thinking then? Did his heart shatter? We may never know fully, But imagine it. You had just laughed in joy, and immediately after, you heard a command that froze that laughter into silence. How would you react? Would you argue with God? Would you plead and beg for another way? Or would you remain silent, carry the pain inside, and walk forward in obedience? That question is not only for Abraham, it is for all of us, all who are listening to this story. Look at your own life. Perhaps you, too, have had an Isaac, something so precious that you cannot imagine losing it. It might be your child, your spouse, your dream, your pride, and sometimes life, or God, places you in a situation where you must choose. Hold on tightly, or surrender it for something greater. Placed in that moment, would your faith survive? The challenge and the journey. One morning, the sky was still blue. The earth was still calm as on any other day. Isaac was still laughing innocently. Sarah was still busy inside the tent. But then, in the silence, Abraham heard a voice, a command filled with power. Take Isaac, your only son, the one you love, up to Mount Moriah. There, offer him as a burnt sacrifice to me. This was, without question, the most terrifying moment of Abraham's life. No father could ever imagine such a scene. A cold, direct order with no room for negotiation. Now imagine yourself in that position. You have waited your entire life for this child. He is your joy, your hope, the proof of God's love. And now, that very God commands, kill him. What is striking is, Abraham did not argue. No words of protest. No recorded tears or complaints in the Bible. He simply prepared. The next morning, Abraham rose early. He split the wood. He saddled the donkey. He called Isaac and 2 servants, and then they set out. The 3-day journey. 3 days. It sounds short, but in this situation, it was as long as a lifetime. 3 days, Abraham walked beside his son, knowing the destination was the place where that son's life would end. 3 days, he carried in his heart unbearable pain, yet kept a calm face before Isaac. Picture the scene. Heavy footsteps pressing into the dusty path. The burning sun shining overhead. The wind whistling through the mountain passes. The 2 servants walked behind, unaware of anything. Isaac strolled innocently beside his father, perhaps talking about things he had seen and learned. Only Abraham, his eyes distant, his mind heavy as stone. Every step was one step closer to his son's death. Every breath was like a knife cutting into his heart. And then, at one point, Isaac turned and asked a simple question. A question that broke his father's heart. Father, here is the firewood, here is the fire, but where is the lamb for the offering? An innocent, childlike question, yet It pierced Abraham's soul like a blade. He knew the answer, but he could not speak the truth. He could not say, "You are the offering." Instead, Abraham replied with trembling faith, "It is God Himself who will provide the lamb for the offering, my son." That was not a lie. It was the voice of faith pushed to the very edge. He did not know how, but deep inside, he believed that God would have an answer. The terrifying silence, what made this journey even more unbearable, was not just the command, not just the 3 endless days, but the silence itself. Abraham did not argue. He did not complain. He did not question God. Silent when he heard the command. Silent as he prepared the wood. Silent as he walked. Silent even when Isaac asked the question. A silence both sorrowful and terrifying. A silence like a mountain pressing down on the soul. Now place yourself in that moment. If it were you, could you remain silent? Or would you cry, scream, demand to know why God would give such an order? Abraham chose silence, because silence was the language of faith. Faith does not need arguments. Faith simply needs to keep walking. In life, there are moments when you, too, are tested. Times when you must walk a road no one else understands, no one shares, no one accompanies. And sometimes, the only answer you can give is to keep walking in silence. No protest, only silence and faith. The slope to the summit. As the shadow of Mount Moriah came into view, each of Abraham's steps grew heavier. Isaac still walked beside him, eyes bright, not realizing that he was himself the offering. At the foot of the mountain, Abraham stopped the 2 servants. He told them, "Stay here. Isaac and I will go up there. We will worship, and then we will return." That statement carried a mystery. Was Abraham only reassuring his servants? Or, deep within, did he still hold a flicker of hope that both father and son would come back together? Then Abraham placed the wood on Isaac's back. Picture that scene. A father placing on his son's shoulders the very wood that would be used to burn him. A haunting image, suffocating in its weight. Isaac climbed, unknowingly carrying the burden of an offering. Abraham walked beside him, knife and fire in hand. The 3-day journey was almost at its end. The mountain peak was before them. There, life and death awaited. And in the thick silence, only one thing remained, echoing: faith. The moment on the mountain peak, the summit of Mount Moriah, was covered in the morning mist. The silence was so deep that every step seemed to echo like thunder. It was not just the sound of sandals scraping against stone, but the pounding of a heart being torn apart. Abraham led Isaac upward, each step stretching into eternity. And then, at the rough stone altar, he stopped. Here was the place where the command would be carried out. Abraham began arranging the wood. Dry pieces, one after another, stacked together. The clattering of wood sounded like the beat of a funeral drum. Each sharp crack was another cut into his soul. Isaac, still innocent, still unaware of what was about to happen, perhaps looked at his father with curiosity. Why is he so serious? Then came the moment no one wants to imagine. Abraham turned to Isaac. His trembling hands tied the rope. He bound his own son. Pause and picture that. You hold the rope in your hand. You look into your child's eyes, eyes filled with absolute trust in you. No resistance, only innocence, maybe a little confusion. He does not understand why his father is doing this, but he trusts him, trusts completely. Abraham tied the rope. He placed Isaac on the altar, a cold stone altar, and upon it his only son. Silence blanketed everything. No wind, no birds, only the pounding of a desperate heart. Then Abraham raised his hand. He gripped the knife. Steel glistened in the sunlight. At that moment, the entire story curved toward its peak. Tension reached its breaking point. The knife was raised. Just one downward motion, and the command would be fulfilled. And in that instant, Abraham would lose everything. Imagine how he trembled. His hand held the blade, but his heart nearly stopped beating. A father turned executioner. A faith turned into a horrifying act. But just as the blade was about to fall, a voice tore through the sky. Abraham, Abraham. He froze. His hand stopped midair. That voice was not human. It was the voice of an angel, a messenger from heaven. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not harm him. Now I know that you truly fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son. At that moment, the entire atmosphere broke open. The tension, stretched tight like a bowstring, was released. Abraham's hand dropped. The knife fell to the ground. And the tears he had held back finally poured out. He rushed to embrace Isaac. His son was alive, still breathing, still staring at him in stunned confusion. And in that instant, Abraham knew the test was over. But the story did not end there. At that very moment, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw behind him a ram caught by its horns in the thicket. He took the ram and placed it on the altar in place of Isaac. The fire roared. Smoke rose high into the sky. But this time, it was not the cries of his son, but the sound of the ram. A substitution, a symbol. Isaac was spared. Death was transferred to another creature. And from that moment, the ram became the image of salvation, of substitution, of grace. Pause and reflect. Why did the ram appear at that very moment? Why did the angel intervene just in time? Perhaps the message is this: God does not desire human blood. God desires to see faith. And when faith is proven, the sacrifice is no longer required. That moment became a milestone. Abraham was tested to the very limit, and he proved his absolute faith. Isaac lived, continuing as the heir to the promise. And the world gained an immortal symbol: the substitute ram. Throughout theological history, many have looked at this detail and seen the shadow of a prophecy. Isaac carrying the wood up the mountain, foreshadowing Jesus carrying the cross. The ram offered in his place, foreshadowing Jesus sacrificed for humanity. A strange connection spanning thousands of years. But there, on Mount Moriah, the only thing Abraham knew was this: his son was alive. His faith had been proven. And God, exactly as promised, had not abandoned him. From here, we can dive into deeper meanings. But the one thing no one can forget is the moment the knife stopped, the angel's voice thundered, and the ram appeared. A moment that shook the world. A moment that changed everything. The deeper meaning, the story of Abraham and Isaac, is not just an anecdote in the Bible. It is not simply an ancient test belonging to one man, one family, thousands of years ago. In truth, it is a mirror reflecting faith, love, choice, and even ourselves. If we see Abraham only as a historical figure, the story will pass quickly, just like countless others. But if we pause, if we look into our own hearts, we realize we, too, have our own Isaacs. We also have promises, miracles, and treasures so precious that we cannot imagine losing them. And sometimes we are placed before trials no less severe. Abraham faced the ultimate choice to place God above everything, even above the one he loved most. And the question for us is, if we were in that place, what would we choose? What makes this story so great is not just the dramatic details, the raised knife, the angel's intervention, the ram offered in place, but the meaning beneath it: faith pushed to the very limit. Abraham's faith was not an easy faith. It was not the kind of faith you have when everything is going well, when the promises are fulfilled, when the miracles are already visible. It was faith in the very place where an ordinary human being would collapse. Picture it when every piece of evidence is against you, when every emotion inside screams, "This is insane." When your heart is breaking from the contradiction, would you still believe? That is faith at the extreme. Faith that goes against instinct, against emotion, against common sense itself. And Abraham walked in that faith. He did not know what the outcome would be. He did not know if God would intervene. He only knew this: God had spoken, and he obeyed. This story became the standard for faith. And from then on, Abraham was called the father of faith, not because he was perfect, but because he was willing to believe even when everything seemed to collapse. Step out now from the pages of Scripture and look into your own life. Have you ever faced a moment of choice between faith and personal gain, between values and emotions, between what you love and what you believe is right? Perhaps none of us are asked to sacrifice our child as Abraham was, but we each still have our own Isaacs. It could be the career into which you have poured your heart. It could be a relationship you deeply treasure. It could be the dream you have pursued for many years. It could be a habit, a joy, something you are profoundly attached to. And then life, or God, may suddenly demand, are you willing to let it go? Will you place your faith, place your values above all else? That is why Abraham's trial becomes a metaphor for our own. It reminds us that sometimes, to grow, to prove our faith, we must lay down what is most precious. The story of Isaac on Mount Moriah is not only a tragedy, but also an allegory of the journey of human growth. In life, we must often sacrifice in order to mature. A child must sacrifice innocence to step into adulthood. A young person must sacrifice freedom to take on responsibility. A father or mother must sacrifice personal dreams to care for their family. Every step in life is a step of sacrifice. And sometimes that sacrifice is so painful it feels unbearable. Yet it is precisely in sacrifice that we grow. It is in loss that we discover new value. Abraham was willing to give up everything, even his only son, and in that very moment he was transformed. His relationship with God was lifted to a higher level. In the same way, the trials in our lives, though bitter, though heartbreaking, can become opportunities for us to mature, to understand more deeply faith, love, and even ourselves. The pinnacle of this story's meaning lies in a moving comparison. Abraham was ready to give Isaac, but God stopped him. And yet, thousands of years later, God truly did what Abraham did not have to do. He gave his one and only Son, Jesus, as the sacrifice for humanity. Pause and feel the weight of that detail. Abraham prepared to sacrifice, but his son was spared. God did not hold back his son, but allowed him to walk to the cross. What Abraham endured was a test, but what God did was reality. The image of Isaac carrying the wood up the mountain echoes the image of Jesus carrying the cross. The image of the ram offered in Isaac's place points directly to Jesus himself, the Lamb of God, sacrificed for humanity. The story of Moriah does not end with Abraham. It stretches forward, connecting to the ultimate act of salvation on Golgotha. Whether or not you hold religious faith, this story still carries profound meaning. It teaches us about endurance in trial. It teaches us that love and faith sometimes demand sacrifice. It shows us that in the moments when we feel we have lost everything, there may still be an unexpected way out. Just as the ram appeared in the thicket. That is why the story of Abraham does not belong only to religion. It belongs to humanity. It is a symbol of faith and of sacrifice, to realities that every culture and every person must face. And now, I want to ask you, the one listening to this story, have you ever stood on your own Mount Moriah? Have you ever been placed before the choice between holding tightly to what you love and stepping forward to a greater calling? And if that moment comes, what will you do? We have walked together through a long journey, from the quiet morning when Abraham first heard God's voice, to the 3 silent days climbing the mountain, to the moment when the knife was raised high on Mount Moriah. We have heard the angels cry, witnessed the ram that took Isaac's place, and followed the deeper meaning of that event as it stretched across human history. But now, as the story comes to a close, let us pause for a moment to see the most important truth. The story of Abraham is not only about a father and a son. It is about faith. Faith so great that it transcends human pain. That faith was not easy. It did not come in times of happiness, but in the most brutal hour. Abraham had to walk in sorrow, placing God above Isaac, his only son. And it was in that choice that he became the father of faith, a mirror for millions, even billions, who came after him. Yet this story is not only Abraham's, it is yours, it is mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever faced a difficult choice in life. Have you ever stood on your own Mount Moriah? Have you ever had to choose between what you love and what you believe is right? Have you ever felt that God, or life itself, was testing you by placing on your shoulders a burden that seemed impossible to bear? If you were Abraham, what would you do? Would you dare to walk forward in silence? Would you believe, even when everything inside you screamed in protest? Or would you stop, cling tightly to what you love, and refuse to let go? No one else can answer for you. Only you will know when you stand on your own Mount Moriah. And that is why this story still lives on. It is not just an ancient tale, but a mirror, so that each of us can look inside ourselves, question ourselves, and make our own choice. Today, we may not be asked to sacrifice our children. But trials still come in many forms. A difficult decision at work. A relationship that must be let go. A value that must be held firm, even when it is opposed. Our Isaacs may be different, but the feeling is the same. Pain, struggle, and the call to walk forward in faith. And, like Abraham, we may discover that sometimes what God wants is not the actual sacrifice, but the willing heart. Not blood, but faith. Not death, but growth. So, if you were Abraham, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear your perspective, your stories, and your personal experiences. Perhaps you have your own Mount Moriah to tell a story that could inspire others.